Episode 5, Green Charles. I've found myself in this role since birth, but while I'm at it, I do my best. It is June 1969. We are at the beginning of what will go down in history as the Summer of Love. On the streets of London, indeed, of swinging London, there is great excitement. Mary Quant's miniskirts mix with long hippie dresses. Crowns of flowers in hair clash with Twiggy's provocative cut that stands out on billboards and magazines. Guys hide behind bushy sideburns and rock star looks. While everything seems to cry out to non-conformity, our Charles is the opposite. He is 21 but looks twice as old. He has lacquered hair, a flat tuft, a parting on one side. His face is a little sweaty from the floodlights of the television studio where he is sitting. Two journalists are pressing him in a long interview on the occasion of the imminent investiture as Prince of Wales. The ceremony, in which Charles, on his knees, would have described himself as a liege man of life and limb, faithful vassal of the Queen, would be held in the castle of Caernarvon, the fortress symbol of English domination, and will be one of the key moments of his life. Charles knows that the interview represents his debut as a working royal in the eyes of the nation. It's a big responsibility, but he is on track. He speaks with serious nonchalance about the most disparate topics, from the rights of workers in Wales to the French presidential elections, up to the role of the monarchy in the post-imperialist age. He candidly opens up about the solitude in which he is growing up, and demonstrates clear ideas about the military career he would have undertaken after his studies. He is still young, but he demonstrates profound maturity. One of his questions concerns the coat of arms associated with the title of Prince of Wales that would have accompanied him almost throughout his life. 3 feathers enclosed by a motto, in German, Ich dien, I serve. It was Edward of Woodstock, known to history as the Black Prince, who established it in the 1300s. Charles doesn't blink an eye. Serving is the basis of all work, he says, and if, like me, you have a deep sense of duty, helping others must become your mission. In that moment, everyone understood that Charles wanted to make himself useful. And if his mother, who became queen at 25, had grown up learning the role of the monarchy, he had to find a function. But which one? The answer comes 7 years later, once his studies and a military career that earned him the title of Lieutenant in the Royal Air Force and Vice Admiral of the British Royal Navy was completed. It was the 1970s, and today, as then, the United Kingdom is grappling with galloping inflation, to which is added a high rate of unemployment, which mainly affects young people from the suburbs. A few years later, this discontent would lead to riots that set fire to several districts of London and other cities in the country. At Camilla's suggestion, the young heir to the throne decides to spend the army severance pay, £7,400, which corresponds to €80,000 today, by providing non-repayable loans to 21 pilot projects aimed at children belonging to the most disadvantaged communities. At the basis of his creed is the theory of virtuous circles. Simply put, and you help someone get a job, you not only create an asset to the economy, but you also set an example for the community. And so, with those funds, 2 boys out of a reform school open a fishing club, a 19-year-old opens a social welfare centre, a training school for lifeguards is built in Cornwall, and an information campaign is funded throughout the country on how to fix your bike yourself. It was 1976, the year that marked the birth of the Prince's Trust, an organisation that today has 650 partner companies, has ties in Canada, China, America and Australia, is supported by the work of 6,000 volunteers, and collects donations of around £4 million every month. In 50 years, Charles has helped over 1 million young people find a purpose in life and cultivate their potential. Among the beneficiaries, there have been many names known today, such as the illusionist Dynamo, Idris Elba, who in 2013 played Nelson Mandela in the film The Long Road to Freedom, and David Oyelowo, who in the following year played Martin Luther King in the film Selma. In those years, in addition to the economic crisis, the young prince was tormented by another phenomenon, also visible to all. The skyline of London was changing, and too rapidly. In Downing Street, there is Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady. She is the architect of deregulation, an explosion of the free market that is bringing with it an uncontrolled building boom. In just a few years, thousands of tons of concrete were injected into the arteries of London to build buildings with a modern, often futuristic design, such as the Lloyd's headquarters or Canary Wharf, one of the centres of world finance. Charles is restless, to say the least. He hates concrete. He is against building expansion that does not meet the needs of local communities. But, above all, he cannot stand modernist architecture, because, he says, it does not respect the sacred geometry of nature. Charles begins to study the principles of biomimicry, a term that derives from the Greek bios, meaning life, and mimesis, translating to imitate. According to this discipline, which is based on the celestial virtues of trust, beauty, and goodness, the forms we find in nature are the most effective, the most beautiful, and also the most technologically advanced. The first to realise this was Leonardo da Vinci, who started from bat wings to design his flying machine. Today, we see this principle everywhere. The nose of trains imitates the beak of birds. The tail of airplanes imitates the fin of a shark. Velcro imitates the flowers that stick to clothes, and so on. As Albert Einstein said, whatever man can invent, nature has already created it. Animated by these principles, Charles manages, with strokes of ink, to bury the expansion of the National Gallery, to avert, years later, of imposing skyscrapers in Chelsea, and to delay a building project that would have obscured the dome of St. Paul, attracting the hostility of modernist architects. But that's not enough. And to demonstrate the validity of his theories, in 1988 he built the town of Poundbury from scratch, just 200 kilometres from London. He is the first sovereign of England to have created a city, but unlike his predecessors who had conquered territories with weapons and soldiers, he was helped by architects to create a place that focuses on community, classicism, and harmony. He discourages dependence on the car and pushes the inhabitants to have a close relationship with nature. According to some, a somewhat nostalgic project, but not without avant-garde elements for this. There are no stop signs or traffic lights. Instead, next to the main crossroads of the village, Charles has large trees planted. Today, more than 4,000 people live in Poundbury, twice as many as originally planned, and most of them are delighted. According to what his collaborators say, Charles seems to suffer from a compulsive need to help others and to improve things. "It is my duty to care about every single citizen of this country," he said in an interview. And worries are certainly not lacking. Indeed, in those years, Charles was a flooded river, and he spoke as the prophet of a new renaissance. There is no sector, discipline, or topic on which he does not have something to say, and on which he does not take a clear position. Sometimes, however, he chose unconventional paths, not to say slippery. In the early 80s, he became interested, not without arousing perplexity, in alternative medicine. Ever since, he studies Ayurvedic practice, Oriental medicine, and homeopathic therapies. In 1982, in a speech at the British Medical Association, Charles stated that it is wrong to consider a symptom an entity on its own and unrelated to the individual, instead of taking into consideration man as a whole and studying his diet, his habits, and his family history. In a sense, he was right, but at the time several luminaries were quick to label him as an enemy of science. And so, for a period, Charles managed to alienate not only the modernist architects, but also doctors. Charles has more disparate interests, and in his obsessive search, for him, there are no limits. It ranges from sacred art to cosmology, from the Platonic school to Taoism, from Marsilio Ficino to Gerson therapy. Following the death of his great-uncle Lord Mountbatten, he even underwent a séance with a medium. However, what influenced him above all were the teachings received from his friend and mentor Lawrence van der Post, of whom we have already spoken, who transmitted to him a mystical vision of the relationship with nature. Seen as a guardian of a primordial balance, a sublime harmony to be defended or to rediscover. With hindsight, we could define him as one of the first representatives of what is now called eco-spirituality. In 1984, he railed against genetically modified foods, warning that man was experimenting Frankenstein style with the very things of life. To those who accuse him of being against progress, he responds by defining tradition as the accumulation of knowledge and wisdom that we should offer to the next generation. Some have described him as detached from reality, especially during the period in which the wreck of his marriage to Diana and the media hype led him to spend more time in his country estates. It is there, however, that Charles, branded a rambling hermit, can devote himself to issues dearest to him, half a century before they become mainstream, starting with environmental protection and sustainable agriculture. It is no coincidence that he is one of the first to denounce the use of pesticides, to oppose industrial production, intensive agriculture, and to promote zero-kilometre agriculture, to preserve the agricultural communities scattered around the country. He had understood the importance of food sovereignty 20 years before anyone coined the expression. In 1986, he converted part of the land in the Duchy of Cornwall to produce organic food: eggs, pasta, honey, salad, milk, carrots, meat, fish, cheese, and so on. Today, 40 years later, Duchy is the leading national brand for the production of organic food and drinks, and part of the proceeds are invested in training courses on sustainable cultivation methods, which are attended by more than 1,000 people every year. His estates reuse rainwater and wastewater, exploit biomass boilers and solar panels. For almost 20 years, he has been driving an Aston Martin converted to run on bioethanol, a blend of cheese and wine byproducts. King Charles does not have a political mandate, but this does not mean he does not feel authorised to stimulate political attention on issues that would otherwise end up ignored. This is the case of the so-called Black Spider memos, the letters on headed paper sent to Tony Blair's government, in which Charles sets out theories, makes suggestions, and draws attention to the most desperate issues, from the war in Iraq to the quality of food in school canteens. He urges Elliot Morley, the then Environment Minister, to do something about the illegal fishing of Patagonian toothfish, whose overfishing was endangering the lives of Chilean albatross. The press accuses him of ignoring the neutrality protocol required of the British family, and he is branded as a nosy prince. The Supreme Court intervened in the case after a long trial brought by The Guardian, and part of these letters have been published. Years later, Tony Blair publicly defended him, arguing that, thanks to King Charles's interest, the government was able to make much more informed decisions on occasionally murky conservation issues. On the other hand, Charles never tried to promote his own interests, nor would he have obtained anything in return. His attentions were firmly focused on the planet and on the common well-being, to the delight of the Patagonian toothfish. As king, Charles heads the Anglican Church as Fidei Defensor, which means defender of the faith. This title is close to those who have always fought for interreligious dialogue. "I should rather be the defender of all faiths," he once said. He is a friend of the Dalai Lama, who he once hosted in the Highgrove estate to show solidarity with Tibetan monks in the face of Chinese oppression. He has constant relations with the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. He has exchanged theological views with Pope John Paul II, Pope Ratzinger, and Pope Francis. He reads the Quran and defines Islam as a great tradition that has so much to offer the modern world. starting with the holistic version of the universe and of nature as an entity endowed with intelligence, an antidote to Western materialism. And it is precisely against indiscriminate and unsustainable progress and unbridled consumerism that the Prince of Wales takes sides, and he is one of the first to do so. Charles has been trying to raise public awareness on the effects of climate change and the protection of biodiversity since the late 1970s. In the 80s, he travelled the world far and wide, observing closely. In 1990, he made a documentary, The Earth in Balance, broadcast by the BBC, in which he stated that the solution cannot come from technology alone, without first a debate on the meaning of well-being and progress. 2 years later, he hosts scientists from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on the Britannia, the royal family yacht. He proved to be a man of action, and used his position as a public figure to promote a healthier and more harmonious way of life. In this, he has great strength, because nobody refuses an invitation from Prince Charles. In 2007, he founded the Prince of Wales Corporate Leaders Group on Climate Change, an organisation which brings together business leaders to discuss how to tackle climate change. It puts industry, ministers, and non-governmental organisations at the same table. It collects testimonies from the world of cinema and entertainment. What it lacks in charm and appeal, it makes up for with the ability to aggregate. A transversal soft power that extends over the entire planet. He has founded associations for the defence of biodiversity in the Amazon forest and the protection of marine species, and launched finance centres for women's education in Indian villages, which, among other things, turns out to be an excellent deterrent to overpopulation. And launched finance centres for women's education in Indian villages, which, among other things, turns out to be an excellent deterrent to overpopulation. He has also established centres for access to microcredit in Bangladesh in order to protect farmers. He understands that, as he said at the time when speaking of medicine, to treat a symptom, it is necessary to have an overall, holistic vision. Until his coronation, Charles was patron of over 500 organisations, ranging from sustainable construction to the fight against cancer to training courses for children in Jordan. King Charles has managed to create a global network of tens of thousands of people, a virtuous circle that has been feeding itself since 1976, started from those £7,400 donated to finance 21 pilot projects. A constant commitment, a great dedication, and a very strong tenacity. Keep calm and carry on, regardless of criticisms and prejudices. Not surprisingly, in 2021, at the United Nations Climate Conference held in Glasgow, he addressed the audience from the stage of the convention centre where the world's greats gather. I hope it is now clear to everyone what I've been repeating for ages. Today, another crown rests on his head, that of St. Edward. Other honours and, above all, other burdens. How will the path of the new king continue? How will the new Carolean age be remembered? Only time will tell. But certainly, as the ever-present Elizabeth II said, often it is the small steps, not the giant leaps, that determine the most lasting change. This, Charles has always known. But from today, finally, it is up to him to write the future of the kingdom. Well then, let's hope you get along, Your Majesty. Or, as we say around here, God save the King.